So we're picking up now after the Greeks have come out of the Dark Ages. During this time, we begin to see the rise of the tyrant, or someone who has seized power rather than having it handed to them by way of birth. So someone who has taken control. At first, tyrants were not necessarily all that bad. Some tyrants sought to tear down aristocratic exploitation, but eventually the term tyrant does hold a negative connotation. As the Greeks spread out in colonies, they established the polis, or the city-states, polis being the singular form of that. A Greek city-state, a polis, more often than not, had a fortified higher ground called the Acropolis, and this is where you would find temples, administrative type buildings, but this is also the highest defensive point of a city, and the city would sort of spread out from the center point, the Acropolis. Some of the most sort of popular Greek city-states, or at least the ones that are maybe most well known. Let's start off with Sparta. While Athenians, we'll get to them in a little bit, spent time with art and democratic debates, Spartans were strict. They did not encourage artistic development. They did not engage in small talk. Theirs was a very intense military society. Authority was not given to the people. This is not a democratic society. This was authority was kept in an oligarchy of elders. An oligarchy basically means a rule by few. Okay, so this is a small oligarchy of elders which rules the Spartan polis. The Spartans conquered their neighbors, basically enslaving them. When a Spartan child was born, if he or she was not considered good enough, then that baby would be left outside to die from the elements and hunger. And this is referred to as infant exposure. When boys were 7 years old, they entered military training. When 30 years old, they could live at home, but they stayed in constant contact with other men by eating every meal with them. Spartan women managed all household issues, and they actually had some wide economic freedom. They were trained in athletic endurance, very much like the Spartan men. They learned how to fight, and they seemed to be just as fierce as the men. To give an example, I remember reading a story about a Spartan mother who supposedly looked at her son as he was going out to battle. She said, "Come back carrying your shield, or come back on it." So, in other words, come back victorious or come back dead. How would you like for your mom to tell you that? You come back victorious or don't come back at all? So Spartan women, pretty much just as intense as the men. Corinth. We don't really talk a whole lot about Corinth in our normal history books, but this is an interesting place, and especially since it shows up in the scriptures, most of my students just have a basic sort of question of what is Corinth? Where is, what's the big deal about Corinth? Corinth was a polis that was ruled by a king, but this king was elected by a council. So in many ways, an oligarchy of elders, as it were, determine, they vote on who will be the king, who will be the head ruler. Corinth was the largest port as well as the richest city in ancient Greece. It is 5 times as large as Athens, and I like to refer to this as the original Sin City, okay? So if you wanted a red light district, this is where you went. The port is the largest, right? Parties are really, really heavy going on in Corinth. So once again, Corinth is like sort of like the original Sin City. Athens. Now, Athens We talk so much about Athens whenever you look in your history books because Athens was considered the epitome of ancient Greek culture and life. It's the city of democracy. At first, however, an oligarchy did hold order, um, uh, and in Athens' case, power rested specifically with the aristocrats. By about 600 BC, there's an aristocrat named Solon who rose up as the sole leader of the oligarchy. He introduced several reforms, including an increase in democratic rule. Unfortunately, however, this democracy was definitely not foolproof, and so we see power still resting, for the most part, with the aristocrats, and the poor people are in many ways continue to be exploited. He does begin to reorder some of the social rankings as well as to promote some ideas of equality, but again, these ideas do not take root. And there is some resistance to some of the reforms he tries to initiate. In let's see, after Solon, after some time, we see eventually another aristocrat come sort of rise up as the sole leader of the Athenian democratic oligarchy, something to that effect. Anyway, his name is Cleisthenes. Now, Cleisthenes, being an aristocrat, doesn't necessarily have a very close connection with the poor people, but he's not necessarily their last choice. But Cleisthenes is not able to stay because a guy by the name of Pisistratus literally rolls into town in a chariot with a woman riding in the chariot with him, a tall, lovely girl, but a very tall girl, that he claims is Athena. And who is the patron goddess of Athens but Athena? And so Pisistratus rolls into town and he takes power. He becomes a tyrant. He is the first tyrant of Athens, and he is considered a very good tyrant, actually. He institutes several reforms to help out the farmers, and he really sort of changed a lot of things economically for Athens, and he kind of worked to bring Athens to a point of leadership in commercial trading. However, when he died, his son Hippias assumed control, and he did not rule with as fair a hand as his father. Hippias ultimately was deposed, and Cleisthenes was brought back in. Cleisthenes is credited with bringing true democracy to Athens. Again, it's still not perfect because women, slaves, and citizens who were non-Athenian of non-Athenian descent, they were not represented. But it's a true democracy in the sense of one person, one vote, right? So whoever is considered a citizen and has the right to vote, you get one vote. So it's the majority rules basically. Another idea that Cleisthenes introduced to Athenian society was that of ostracism. Every year, Athenians voted for the one man they considered the most dangerous to their society, and they exiled him for 10 years. Eventually, we'll see Themistocles, the great naval commander, was eventually ostracized. Something that a lot of people like to know about are the Olympic Games. Athens and Sparta represent two of the more famous Greek polis, but all Greeks shared a sense of identity since they spoke the same language, they're worshiping the same gods, and they adhere to the same heroic values of arete. The first Olympic Games were held in 776 BC, and to start off with, it's only a foot race, but eventually it expanded to include boxing, wrestling, chariot racing, as well as other competitions. women were not allowed to attend because the men were competing in the nude. But however, you've got women like the Spartan women who are saying, "Wait a minute, we we want to compete in these same type events." So the women basically create their own Olympic Games where they have their own winners. Now they don't receive the same acclaim as men, but sort of within the female community, there is this sense of camaraderie and hey, that's the woman who won, the race. Greek city-states frequently fought each other because they were incredibly independent. And the Olympic Games really brought a way for the ancient Greeks to peacefully express arete, as well as to compete for glory. And ultimately, this does help to unite them in spirit, if not completely politically. And this is going to help them when going up against sort of their first great invasion. In 499 BCE, a Greek city-state in Persian lands revolted against King Darius of Persia. When the Greeks revolted, the Persians advanced and sacked the city of Miletus. Athens sent help. They sent aid, but it wasn't enough, and Persia continued its assault. Basically, the Persians were like, "Oh no, you had not," right? And so they start sending their massive army to invade Greece, ultimately to continue to expand their territory. The story goes that Athenians sent a man by the name of Philippides to literally run and ask Sparta for help. He runs from the city of Marathon all the way somewhere around about 100 miles away to where the Spartans were, only to have the Spartans say, "No, we're not going to help." However, by the time he gets back, the Greeks have won. They were drastically outnumbered, but winning the Battle of Marathon ultimately shamed the Persians into backing down, and it created a further sense of unity and superiority among the Greeks. Of course, modern-day races are called marathons in honor of Philippides and this run that he makes, even though it technically wasn't successful. 10 years later, the Persians, being the great power, the great world power at this time, they are not going to let this teeny tiny peninsula of people continue to hold this idea of superiority, right? And, okay, you beat us one time, but that was a fluke, right? We're gonna take care of this. So 10 years later, Darius' son Xerxes advanced on Athens again in a second invasion. At the Battle of Thermopylae, now this is where we've got the movie 300, which I do not encourage anyone to watch. Ugh, you get no historical benefit from this movie whatsoever. But anyway, we have the Battle of Thermopylae, in which a small number of Greeks, including are being led by some Spartans, held a small mountain pass, keeping the Persian force at bay for several days. However, the Greeks were betrayed by one of their own, and the Persians found a way around to fight the Greeks from behind. The Spartans of the group remained and fought to the death. And this is where we have the 300, the supposed 300 Spartans who gave their lives as other Greeks ran to go let the other Greeks know, hey, the Persians are coming. Once all the Greeks were killed, Battle of Thermopylae, they continue to advance on Athens. At this point, we have the Greeks going, what do we do? And so Themistocles, who has sort of risen up as a leader in Athens, he sends someone to the oracles at Delphi. When they get there, they say, hey, what do we do? And the response, here's the response from the oracle at Delphi. Trust in the wooden walls. Yep, that's the response from the oracle at Delphi. Trust in the wooden walls. Now, Themistocles took this to mean that they needed to build a navy. Trust in the wooden walls. That means we need to build some boats, which look, something like that, right? We need to build some boats. We need a navy. And he convinces all of the Greeks who are there with him, largely the Athenians, to build a navy of boats called triremes, right? Triremes are these boats which they're manned by several people rowing, but they have at the very front, where am I? There's my finger. At the very front, on the bow of the boat, they have a battering ram, and they can ram into other ships, poking a hole in it basically and making them sink. So this is something that Themistocles is able to convince the Athenians to do. He convinces them to abandon the city of Athens, and they lead the Persians to the Bay of Salamis. Once again, there's a huge Persian force, and they've entered a very tiny area. And in this naval victory, the Greeks pound them without mercy. And once again, the Greeks beat the Persians. So the Greeks are, feeling pretty high and mighty at this point in their history. They're stoked over their victories at the Persians, and from approximately 49 to 336 BCE, the Greeks enter what is called the Classical Age. And during this time, they really do accomplish quite a bit in art, in architecture, literature, philosophy, and representative democracy. Even though the Greeks sent the Persians packing, as it were, the Persians were still a force to be recognized, and Athenians realized that whoever controlled the Aegean region could effectively protect or invade Greece. Since the Athenians have the strongest navy, this is kind of good news for them. So in around about 477, Athens got together with other polis of the region to form a defensive coalition to protect against possible invasion by sea. Each member of the Delian League, as this coalition was called, was to give money to a treasury which maintained a large naval fleet to protect all of them. And the treasury was placed on the tiny island of Delos, giving their name the Delian League. All the members of the league were supposed to have a say in decision-making, but of course Athens was stronger than all the rest, and they were so strong that they became incredibly arrogant as well and took control of the league. The league became more of an empire for Athens rather than a league of equal independent polis. In 454, Athens took the treasury from Delos and placed it in Athens. They're like, it's ours now. And with this money, Athens could rebuild the Acropolis, which the Persians destroyed, as well as fund many other projects as well. So, a guy by the name of Pericles, who was not quite a tyrant, but he definitely held most of the power in the Athenian government. He's the guy who is sort of calling the shots here, and he encourages the reclamation of the treasury on the island of Delos, and brings it in. And when in the Democratic Assembly, Pericles began paying members and even invited the poor. His democracy was more advanced than even what was before him, and he goes on to hire at least 20,000 citizens in various jobs, which encouraged Athenians to be more involved in the democratic process. Part of what Pericles encourages is a lot of rebuilding and a great deal of artwork in the city. He encouraged the removal of again, of the Delian League treasury for to Athens for these projects. When looking at Greek architecture, you normally see the post and lintel form of construction, which is columns supporting a roof. Greek columns took on several looks. We have the Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian columns. We see sort of a progression in first we just want to make sure the roof stays up to, oh, let's make it look a little pretty to, ooh, let's make it look as pretty as we possibly can, right? Architects started designing buildings with great care, making sure that they followed mathematical proportions while at the same time being aesthetically pleasing. The most astonishing structure built during this time was the Parthenon, a temple to the goddess Athena. The statue of Athena stood, gosh, I can't even remember now, somewhere around about like 20 feet high. 30, I'm probably getting that number completely wrong. I apologize. Make sure you're reading in your book. Anyway, it's huge, and you can see an example or a replica of this actually in the city of Nashville, Tennessee. But this thing is huge. It's covered in gold and precious jewels. The temple also contained numerous other statues and carvings. So this was, it became sort of a tourist attraction in a way. We also see the continuation of advancement in different places or in different areas of thought, such as in medicine. And this is where we see Hippocrates coming out as the father of medicine during this time. And he encouraged looking at the environment and looking at things other than the gods as being the cause for sickness. So let's leave off for there, and then we'll pick up next time with the Peloponnesian War and then sort of the twilight of the Greek Empire.